Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk It Out and Find Out, the podcast where we dive into everything that's on your mind. Join me, your host, Dee Lene, as we keep it real, casual, and explore today's trendiest topics. Whether you're looking for solutions, insights, or just a little inspiration, this is the space where curiosity meets conversation. So today's topic is about overcoming fear. Overcoming fear requires a delicate balance of courage and vulnerability. And courage is often misunderstood as an absence of fear, but in reality, it's the willingness to move forward despite our fears. It's like an inner strength that we have to take action on in order to face uncertainty and to embrace the discomfort, because it is very uncomfortable when you're fearful of something. And courage alone is not always enough. It needs to be accompanied by vulnerability. And this gives us the openness to acknowledge fear and to accept our limitations and also embrace the possibility of failure. And we all have failed at something, and failing is not always a bad thing. I think if we fail, it creates stamina. On the other hand, vulnerability allows us to be honest with ourselves, and not only ourselves, but with others. And it teaches us that fear is not a weakness. But we can look at it as a universal experience because a lot of things that we do or a lot of things that we say um, are different experiences that we experience in different settings. And so it's a universal experience. But by admitting our fear, we disarm them and then we strip them of their power over us. And having this honesty regarding this fosters a connection, and it reminds us that we are not alone in our struggles. Everything that we've experienced, somehow, some way, someone else has experienced that same thing. Now, I'm not downplaying the experience because I know that everyone handles things differently and they handle it in their own way. But it's not so much the experience as much as it is how we handle it. So, together, courage and vulnerability create a powerful force for personal growth. Courage pushes us to take risks, while vulnerability ensures we remain authentic in the process. And it can force us also to be humble. And sometimes, being humble corrects, who we are in that light, and it allows us to be more open, which can work in our favor. When we accept fear as a natural part of life rather than something that is suppressive or avoidant, we can then move forward with a greater confidence and resilience. So, embracing fear gives us the opportunity to grow, and it invites us to learn and to become more fully ourselves. I spent a lot of years not understanding my likes versus my dislikes because of fear and downplaying my ability to be like a whole person. Every act of courage, no matter how small, it builds the capacity to face fear with greater ease. So I started embracing my fear with bravery and openness. And then it helped me to transform my obstacles into a stepping stone through my strength and self discovery. So I built strength through courage. So I tended to let my emotions take over, and then they enlisted my fear as a coping mechanism. And I told myself that I would replace that emotion with intelligence. So every time I had a feeling or I was in my feelings about something, I would think about I would think about it more from a logical or practical perspective. Fear is an element of who we are, and that's something we have to remember, and it can improve or disapprove us. Now, that sounds a little weird, but when I thought about it, I was like, it could either improve you as a person or it could disapprove you. So, what does that mean? It means when we work in the negative, we allow fear to disapprove us. So, this causes us to be disappointed in ourselves because most of us have higher expectations of ourselves. Our thoughts affect the things that are working to improve us. Fear embraces where we are at the moment, and if we are operating in a spirit of negativity, we may act out on our current emotions by not being our true authentic selves. And ultimately, we become someone we think others want to see or they want to see in us. So I say to myself, how do I change that narrative? Well, courageous behaviors are something that have to be developed. Courage can build character by allowing you to understand and set boundaries. And in future conversations, I'll tell you why I refer to boundaries so much because I talk about boundaries a lot, but we'll reserve that for another time. Boundaries should always be in place for everyone. I don't care if it's your mom, your dad, your sister, your brother, your cat, or your dog. And of course, respectfully. But this keeps everybody on the same playing field and it cultivates peace in the environment. Now, courage has a main objective, and the main objective of courage is to build a better you. How do you do that? Well, having courage to tell others the truth is one way you do it. And when you do that, it displays a form of courage that you can use to, form relationships, but also to allow yourself when you encounter fear to kind of put that fear aside. And this is one way you can do it. Now, the caveat to that statement is you must understand courage and what it brings to the table. And as I mentioned earlier, courage can improve or disapprove you. So this means if you're working in the positive or the negative, there's two different ways that you react to things. So if you're working in a positive, it can bring you good energy and supply the necessary tools that you need to bring peace and harmony. But on the flip side, it can pull from your good energy and drain you. Now, you may ask, how do I build courage through positive energy? Well, you got to practice. When it comes a time to have tough conversations, that's one way you can do it. And you got to seize the opportunity to have them and welcome them. An example of this is when a person you respect doesn't respect you, right? So their behaviors exhibit disrespect. And this gives an opportunity for you to have an uncomfortable conversation. And again, welcome it. So, what does that conversation look like? Let's just say you have a friend who constantly, talks in the negative or maybe a little insulting, and they may laugh about it and they may think it's okay. Now, this person may or may not be conscious of how they're framing their words with you, but you notice it by how it makes you feel. Do you ignore it or do you address it? One or two things can happen. If you do address it, they can embrace it and correct their behaviors, and they may say, I didn't even know I was doing that. And I've encountered that too. Or they'll become defensive. And this is when the courage to trust your intuition comes into play. I have a saying, if you feel it, it's real. Don't second guess yourself, trust your gut. What are some words that you can use to frame your rebuttal? Like, again, you don't want to match energy at that point and you don't want to, tit for tat, or you don't want to become defensive, right? So, how would I respond to someone who is defensive? And this may be a little bit corny, but when people act a certain way with me, I tend to be a little bit more formal in my approach. So I would say something like, I notice you always refer to negative things when addressing topics related to me, and you always seem to highlight my negative side. Is there a reason why you approach it like that? And I just wait for their response. I let them talk, sometimes. Sometimes I may interrupt, but the idea here is to let them talk, right? And then you're able to address it accordingly. If they come back with negative comments, then I would approach it like this. We are both aware that I'm not perfect. However, I expect as a friend for you to communicate my flaws lovingly and respectfully. And it appears that you're not interested in my healing. So maybe we just need to dig a little deeper to identify the source of the negativity. And if they embrace the statement with ways to correct their actions, then this friend is a keeper. And they're wanting to work out the relationship, and the kinks. On the other hand, if they come to you defensively, as I mentioned, then this gives a red flag. Now, keep in mind, you don't always know what a person may be going through at that time. So their reaction to you may be based on something that they're going through, right? But what we don't want to do is embrace someone who's pretending to have your best interests at heart, but really they don't. They don't really, care how you feel. And I've encountered that as well. The idea here is that you can no longer allow them to keep up the shenanigans as it'll fester into something bigger to address. So I say, address it, get it out the way, and then you can kind of assess where your relationship is with that person. Now, these conversations will require you to be vulnerable, which will require humility on your part. Let the person speak and bare their soul without interruptions so you can identify their true intentions through their immediate reaction. Our goal is always to retain healthy relationships. So it's a win win either way because you're identifying who people are to you. I say this because if a person doesn't have true intentions, it gives you the space to identify and eliminate any relationship that will potentially affect your inner peace. So, I hope today's discussion was helpful as it gives us space not only to overcome our fears, or it gives us the thought process or something to think about when it comes to our fears, but to learn how courage and vulnerability can facilitate growth. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you'll join me for my next episode, airing every Friday with fresh and exciting conversations. You can stream it on all major platforms, including Apple, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, iHeartRadio, and more. I love to hear your thoughts and suggestions. I'm looking forward to you joining the conversation next week. Sure to hit the follow button to join the conversation weekly.